Panelists have actually been able to turn up today. Carl Holt and Lugasile Nsebeza have had to withdraw. However, looking around the audience, I can see lots of experts in around policy issues, so we will easily fill those gaps, I hope. It's a sort of double session. In the first part, we plan to focus primarily on the ANC policy proposals, and then in the second half, on the state of the ANC under the Zuma administration. But it's, hopefully one topic will flow seamlessly into the next. We will have to have a little break, but I think at about 2 to 3, so that people can leave and other people can come in. But we'll start essentially focusing on the policy proposals. To my left is Suzanne Booysen, who is well known, particularly as a radio commentator, but also as an academic and publisher. She's at the School of Public and Development Management at Wits, and of course is the recent author not only of this book, but also she tells me a study that she conducted and managed on the 2009 local government, 11, that's right, local government elections, a study commissioned by the one of the German foundations, has now recently been published as a book. I think probably the only study of the 2011 elections. On my far right is Glenda Daniels, no relation. She is formerly well known as to those of you with the Mail and Guardian, has recently left the Mail and Guardian and is now with the School of Journalism at Wits University, and as we were told, about to publish with Wits University Press a book on the ANC and the media. And then to my right is Anthony Butler, well known as a columnist for Business Day every Friday, say or saw, because Anthony has his column that day. But he was, up until the end of last year, Professor of Political Science at Wits, and now has moved to UCT. Has in recent years published the full-length biography of Cyril Ramaphosa, and also has a Palgrave textbook on government and politics in South Africa, well used. Okay, that's the panel. I'm going to just say a few words. I have, in preparing for this, spent quite a bit of time reading the second transition document, which in a sense is the lodestar document of the set of policy proposals which will be considered at the upcoming policy conference. When I read it, I must say I didn't notice that it in fact actually has a question mark after the second transition, although Anthony tells me the first draft of that will not. Do I need this? Can you hear me? Yeah. No. Oh. Yeah. The first draft did not have that question mark, but the basic argument is that the first transition brought about the democratization of the South African state, and began the process of democratizing South African society, consolidating constitutionalism as the central principle of the post-apartheid political system, weaving the narrative of reconciliation, as it puts it, into the DNA of the new South Africa. The first transition is conceptualized in this document as having freed South Africa from political bondage, quote unquote, and has laid the conditions for the development of a better life for all. This document, the second transition document, argues that the groundwork has been laid for the second transition to take the next step beyond emancipation from political bondage to emancipation from socio-economic bondage. Poverty, unemployment, and all forms of inequality, what is referred to as the triangle, the debilitating triangle of poverty, unemployment, and inequality, remain as the dominant challenge which will be of central concern to the ANC and to the state for the next 3 to 5 decades. The document argues that the business as usual approach, although that's not defined, will not suffice for effectively tackling this triangle of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. What is required now is more than the limited, what is argued, the limited national democratic revolution, which South Africa has thus far experienced. That limited NDR of the 90s, the early 200s, was brought about because of the need, because of the balance of forces at the time, the need to accommodate what it calls existing economic power relations. Now, the document doesn't specify in specific terms what the steps are that need to be taken to overcome the challenges of this triangle of poverty, etc. A number of general objectives are listed, such as the deracialization of existing apartheid property relations, a need to redistribute more effectively the ownership and control of wealth, the land, equity, a need for affirmative action in regard to the development of skills and management. There needs to be a fine-tuning of the balance between developmentalism and welfarism. It also talks about eliminating all forms of patriarchal oppression, transforming gender relations by creating the cultural and material conditions for more effective women's emancipation. It talks about developing a new concept of social cohesion, building a new national consensus around particular values. It refers on a number of occasions to the current framework or the structural framework of the present. And I think one of the questions is, what is this specific? Is this a veiled reference to the Constitution, the current framework? Is there something in the Constitution that has delayed or obstructed the battle against poverty and inequality? And these are some of the topics that we'll throw out. The various sector reports deal more specifically with what needs to be done in regard to land, with regard to mines, with regard to education, with regard to health, the media, etc. And some of the panelists will talk about some aspects of some of the things laid out in that policy framework. We don't have anybody here. Carl was not able to attend. He would have talked about the challenge of health. He would have talked about the National Health Insurance Program. There was an earlier presentation on that, a very interesting one. But one could argue that the building, the development of an NHI, which is a long-term project, 2 or 3 decades ahead, is part of this second transition. But I think I'll ask Anthony if he would like to say something about the proposal with regard to mining.
Sure, thank you very much, John. Before I start on the mining document, I just wanted to add something on the second transition idea on paper. As with many of these documents, they sound more exciting and radical than they turn out to be in practice, I think. And one of the most striking things about this document is it tries to pitch the National Development Plan, the National Planning Commission's development plan, to the National Democratic Revolution. And it does this very upfront, right at the start of the document. In point 4 on the first page, it says the National Planning Commission has put together a National Development Plan. The country has undertaken to adopt it, allegedly, and the document suggests that the National Development Plan should be at the centre of of how the ANC realises its longer-term objectives. That's quite really a conservative move, I would say, despite the radical-sounding rhetoric elsewhere in the document. On the mining nationalization issue. This is rather a special document because it was produced not as a result of the ordinary processes of deliberation, but instead as the result of something of a deliberately engineered political crisis around nationalization. And I think this started out as a political play by the right, which was designed to have, among other effects, among other objectives, the division of the left. And that has succeeded, I think. So by advocating nationalization, the Youth League created enormous confusion in the trade union movement and in the SACP, because the Communist Party has been a very strong opponent of nationalization for 2 decades, but it has never advertised this fact to its membership. So the Communist Party membership, particularly the enormously rapidly growing youth component of the Communist Party, has believed that the party is committed to nationalization, but it has not been so. Instead, it has had an extremely obscure conception of democratic socialization. If you look at, likewise, the Casati documents, including NUN, the most immediately affected union, there's been very little discussion of nationalization in past years, and no concrete planning about how it might actually be accomplished. So by proposing nationalization from the right, as it were, the Youth League was able to throw the Communist Party left and the trade unions into disarray, because they were set at odds with their own members. And I still don't think that that process has played itself out, and that particularly the Young Communist League and many elements within CASATU now have become enthused by the nationalization idea. I think also it was part of the succession business. The Youth League obviously has been associated with people who are challenging for offices, like Mr. Siswali, and the sports minister, Vicky Mbalula, that they have used the nationalization issue to destabilize Zuma. And I think the argument that Jeremy Cronin has made about the mining elements in the mining industry supporting not nationalization, but the inevitable fallback of a state-owned mining company. This is very attractive for people who are losing money in the mining industry, but it's potentially attractive for the mining industry more generally. Because in South Africa we have a mining industry that is creating enormous environmental liabilities. And the companies that are exploiting mineral resources do not want to pick up those liabilities. And they are all too happy, particularly if they are a BE company that's picked up a low-quality minerals asset. They're very happy to go into partnership with the state to have the liabilities taken off their hands. So I think all of those are reasons why nationalization was pursued, and why I don't think we should, any of us, have ever taken it too seriously as a proposal. The Youth League's own document really showed no attempt to put forward concrete proposals for nationalization. I think nobody has thought through how difficult it would be to accomplish in practice in any sector. But the state-owned mining company, I believe, was the key issue, and underlying that is the question of how you fund it. If you're going to channel resources into the mining industry, which obviously makes people in the mining sector happier rather than sad, where are they going to come from? And the policy document as it stands still seems to suggest that people's pensions should be raided to fund investments in the mining sector. In particular, mine workers own pension funds, NUN pension funds. So there's a suggestion that mine workers should invest their own savings in their mines in order to, I believe, to improve the viability of those mines from the perspective of their owners, rather than the workers in them. Of course, all of this ran away with itself. And I think everybody, well, I think very many people were surprised by the degree to which the nationalization rhetoric took hold, not just among the communist youth where you might have expected it, but elsewhere. And I now think that that is going to be difficult to put back into the bottle, that genie, in part because the international context is one in which, in many resource-rich countries, we're seeing the emergence of a new phase of resource nationalism. Resource nationalism refers to the demand by resource-rich countries that traditionally host international mining investors that they should have a bigger share of the profits that are made out of the exploitation of mineral resources. This isn't simply a South African phenomenon, this is happening around the world, and it's been produced primarily by the extended boom of Chinese growth, other growth in emerging economies such as India. So we've already seen a very extended commodity boom with high prices for commodities, and predictions that this boom might continue for another 2 or 3 decades as development continues in countries such as China. In such circumstances, power is shifted to the hands of the possessors of resources, and demands are bound to emerge for those resources to be used to the benefit of the people in the countries in which they're found. So I don't think the issue is going to go away, in part for that reason. I think all along the government's central proposal, going back 10, 15 years, I can remember people talking about super taxes on commodities. I always thought that this was going to be the fallback position, along with the state-owned mining vehicle. There is a proposal for a resource rent tax, very similar to the policy changes that have happened recently in other countries, including in Australia. My own newspaper, of course, for mysterious reasons, it doesn't report on increased taxation in the mineral sector in other countries. But I think this phenomenon is not a big surprise to people in the industry. And I suspect that what the industry wants is for some of the proceeds, as many as possible, to be reinvested into the sector in providing the infrastructure to exploit minerals, to provide training and skills and so on that are needed for the and to resolve the other problems, the administrative and grey area corruption problems that are surrounding mining licenses and the administration of access to mining opportunities. I think I'll leave it there, John.
Thank you, Anthony. Glenda, about communications document.
I think before that, just broadly speaking, to tell you where I see the ANC and the media. As John was saying, business as usual. The business as usual approach is not working for the ANC for a number of reasons, not just because unemployment has worsened and poverty has not been solved, etc. But business as usual approach has not worked also from the point of view of the Constitution, the liberal Constitution and freedom of the media, which means it's not worked for the ANC in terms of the exposés of corruption, which it finds terribly embarrassing. It would rather have a media that was developmental in focus. And by that, what it means, what it understands that to mean is a project that's tied to loyalty of the ruling party rather than a completely free press. So in its last communications document at Polokwane 2007, what was up on the table, and you know, it's during Zuma's rule that in fact the spaces for democracy in terms of the media seem to be closing down, because that policy document was where there was an advocation for a media appeals tribunal, which is really one of the worst things that can happen to the press, because it's a terrible form of regulation. The ANC's backtracked a little bit on this. Initially, we thought it was about pre-publication censorship. It seems like now they want a post-publication form of punishment. And then I don't know how up to date you are with what's happened recently. This year, 2 months ago, the Press Freedom Commission released its findings. The Press Freedom Commission was set up by the South African National Editors Forum and Print Media South Africa to look at regulation of the press. Given the context and given the background, and these are some of the words that the ANC's used to describe particularly newspapers: shabby journalism, inaccurate, unfair, sensationalist, out of sync ideologically with the people, and dignity and respect for people has not been adhered to. And when they mean out of sync ideologically with the people, you can't measure that. You can only measure that in terms of whether it's ideologically and out of sync as they see it with the ANC. So there's a conflation and a collapse with the ANC and the people, which, as I see it, is, it's very unfortunate. And so we have this tension that's developed between, the Liberation Party on the one hand, how it sees its role in South Africa, and then how it sees an unloyal press. That's how it sees South African journalists. And this actually started a long time ago. It started during the Mandela regime, actually. It got worse during the Thabo Mbeki regime, and in fact it's even worse now during the Zuma regime. And I say this because even though Thabo Mbeki was extremely harshly criticized in the press, he actually never sued a single newspaper. In just one suing incident, Zuma's got a lawsuit of altogether, I heard it's 15 million against Sapiro. That's just one cartoonist. Now, he's the highest sued cartoonist in the world by any president. It's such a joke, really. And he's had lots of settlements by newspapers. And newspapers, unfortunately, have not played the game in terms of the Constitution. They should not have been settling anything at all with any politician. But Rapport, for instance, settled with 50,000. The Guardian in London did something odd, and they don't want to disclose the amount they settled with Zuma for something, for a headline, a story called "Get Used to a Corrupt South Africa," which was. And so what we've had then is labeling of the press and labeling of journalists, and they particularly want black journalists to play this game of being in tandem with the ruling party, and then you get called coconuts, enemies of the people, irrespective of whether you're black or not. You're a racist. So now what we've had with the PFC, I told you about the Press Freedom Commission, which was headed by Justice Pius Langa. They've come up with a new regime, which has not yet been accepted by the South African National Editors Forum, but might well be, probably will be, which is for independent co-regulation. What was interesting at this meeting, this happened this year, about 2 months ago, a month and a half ago, was that the ANC's Gwede Mantashe and Jackson Mthembu and Jesse Duarte very happily accepted the proposals. Now, we do wonder whether this is about saving face, because the Media Appeals Tribunal was such a draconian measure to regulate journalists, or what it was about, or whether there's a genuine backtracking, which we'll only know really what that's all about at the end of the month, June Policy Conference. But the ANC said yes, we're very, very happy with the direction now for independent co-regulation. What this means is that what the system we've had in the past is peer regulation. In other words, we will say this journalist did a bad job and we need this apology in the newspaper. The new system now advocates for monetary fines if you've made terrible mistakes. And co-regulation means you regulating in conjunction with members of the public. So we could have gender representation and race and cultural and all sorts of different representations. And it could be okay, and it could be a form of terrible censorship as well. Now, with the second threat to the media, we have the secrecy bill, which has been a backwards and forwards dance that's gone on for, it's about 2.5 years now. The ANC can't seem to make up its mind on what it wants in relation to this, except it does seem that it wants to cut back on the openness and transparency that we have at present. We have a very open society. We can get information if we want to. Recently, we were told that, in fact, they've added a public interest defence clause with the National Council of Provinces process in Parliament. Then the next thing we know, the State Security Agency said, no, we don't accept these recommendations. It's been a very, very confusing time for everybody, all South Africans, especially those that support the Constitution and a free press, to understand what's going on there. But the essential problem with that is that the national interest issue is too broadly defined, such that any old agency can make things classified. So the problem with that is, yes, on the one hand we need openness and transparency and access to information, and on the other hand we have a government that's going too far in the name of protecting national security. It's going to do away with a whole lot of freedoms in society. I think I'll stop there, but just to conclude, my view is that our democracy is under a lot of threat. We're on this sort of precipice, and I can measure it in terms of the media where we are at the moment. It's like we're hanging up there, and we don't know whether we're going to go down one path or the other. It's a very confusing and uncertain time. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Glenda, I think that given that Carl and Lucille aren't here, we will now open it to the floor for people who have comments or any questions. So let's take 2 or 3 and then respond. Anybody? Come on, this is ridiculous. There are plenty of people here who know a lot about policy and practice. Yes, yes.
I'm not one of those experts at all. I sort of come in from the perspective, and Judge Dennis Davies was talking about judiciary and the state and the conflict and tensions there. I think it's natural that we should have tensions between the state and the fourth estate and the judiciary and civil society. And I think it's clearly important that we protect our constitutional rights. But I think that tension is quite natural, and I think that's part of the cut and thrust of democracy. So I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that these are not serious issues, that they shouldn't be challenged and addressed and lobbied and so on. I also think we need to understand that there's a natural tension.
Peter?
I don't disagree with anything that's been said, but I'd just like to put it into global context in that as I regularly move between 4 continents, I see exactly the same threats. Living in the US for 9 months of the year, living under George W. Bush and Rumsfeld, we had enormous threats to freedom of the press. We've had the Assange saga as well in Sweden and in Britain. We've had the recent revelations of Murdoch, which suggests that the press is not also with clean hands. So I would think that one should also start from the premise of what is the press. When I arrived in South Africa last week to come here, I was appalled that I couldn't actually get any information out of the Star, couldn't get any information at all out of the TV, and I could listen to music on the radio. So there's something seriously wrong with the media inherently. But this is also part of a global dumbing down of media. You only have to think of Rupert Murdoch's career in the US. So what I'm saying is that these patterns do not affect only South Africa. Sure, this is focused on the ANC, so I entirely agree with these issues that have been aired. But I'm also seeing a global pressure for this through global power structures and corporations that have a vested interest in doing the same sorts of things, whether it's in Italy or in South America or wherever. So I think we need to contextualise and then relate it also back to these things which you've been talking about. Sorry to disorient the focus from that.
Not at all. No, I think it's a very good point. Yes?
Hi, thank you for your knowledge on us. I have a question with Glenda. With regards to the the newspapers settling their cases. Why would they do that? Surely the Constitution would mean that it would be ruled in favor of the newspaper. Like, does the government have any leverage that could cause them to want to settle?
Can we take your point?
My question is also directed at Glenda. A point of information. What you said about the info bill and the proposed media tribunal is interesting. What I want to know is, in the ANC's proposed consultative document that's going to be discussed next month, what is the proposals under media? Is there a section on media, and what are the policy proposals for discussion there?
Linda, do you want to do that?
Okay. To the first point, yeah, absolutely. The patterns of the world seem to be similar. I was in Tunisia for World Press Freedom Day, and I was completely struck by the similarities. I would have thought it would be quite different from whether it was Syria, America, South America, Africa. There were actually more similarities than dissimilarities. What's happened in the UK has affected all of us profoundly. Especially South Africa, because we followed their kind of regulation system. So as soon as something happens there, and as soon as they decide that we need a regulation system with teeth, South Africa seems to follow the same kind of, it's like, well, if they can do it in the UK, we can do it here. Yet our journalists here never engaged in, as far as I know, phone hacking and stuff as radical as, if you can call it that, and Rebecca Brooks of the world. Why did some newspapers settle cases? I have absolutely no idea. In my view, they ought not to have. They ought to have gone the whole route, to court and to the constitutional court, etc. Instead of just rolling over and, just handing over 50,000 to Zuma. I mean, we don't know how many of these have actually happened. We need to investigate a bit more to find out how and why those newspaper editors did what they did. Not all newspapers have done that, a few have. The proposals under media for discussion, they're not different from the ones that, the same proposals that we put on the table. It seems like year after year after year, policy conference after policy conference. So they have not changed their minds about the fact that they think the journalists of this country are terrible, a disloyal bag of anti-transformation brats who are not covering that, the fact that they built so many houses and they've collected so many telephones. So in other words, what they think is what's not being reported in the press. There's enough good news, they think. And journalists like to report bad news because bad news sells. So, there are two sides to the story. It's not only because bad news sells, but because there's enough corruption to fill newspapers, in my view. But the proposals have not changed, even though there's new Press Freedom Commission reports, etc. The proposals still, the main issue is that we need more for the ANC, is that we need more regulation of the press because the press are wayward. Excuse my own interpretation.
Yes.
This is sort of point of information. The Guardian said it because they called Zuma a rapist. Here, being rapist, and it's purely a legal technical issue.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah.
And because the Guardian didn't say alleged rapist, is that what you said? Is that what the issue was?
They called him a rapist, and clearly that was not, well, he's just been proven not to be a rapist. So in a technical legal issue, they were wrong, they didn't tell us.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to talk about mining and just interested in the environmental liabilities and the fact that our whole energy system is based on coal and the ANC has vested interest in coal and it's one of the biggest polluters and environmental liability substances. I'm just wondering whether you have any thoughts on that. Is that they talk about one way of reducing our carbon emissions, but at the same time are very wedded to coal as their power source.
I don't think that it's only the coal industry, although it is very politically powerful. industry. We've also seen very aggressive lobbying from the nuclear industries, particularly, most obviously from the French nuclear industry. I believe, I was told that there is a French cultural festival either underway or about to begin in Cape Town. And I think if you look in the small print, you'll find that the costs are largely covered by the French nuclear industry. We've had lots of visits in recent months from various French warships. The nuclear industries are also very heavily invested in trying to persuade decision makers that they should be supported. Last week I noticed the absence of the editor of a business supplement, Donald Presley, and I asked where he had gone. And he's apparently, he may be back, but along with many other journalists, he's been invited to visit Texas to hear the good news about fracking. And the fracking industry is also, particularly I believe Shell, has been very aggressively lobbying South African policymakers. So we have to accept that all of these industries engage in the lobbying of professional politicians and officials, and also in trying to press their opinions through the media. And on the whole, the media are not very well equipped in South Africa to mediate and control the kind of professional lobby to which they're exposed. And these are problems that we have to deal with as best we can.
I just want to raise the issue of press regulation and put a question to Susan. I mean, this week we had such extensive coverage of the medicine inquiry in Britain, with the President and the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, having to testify. And all the issues that we are battling with and struggling with in terms of government press relations have emerged there and have been looked at, and co-regulation, all these issues. But it seems to me that within our situation, we can't seem to have a mature discussion debate. It's always about them and us. It's always about, what the ANC is about to do, and, look how innocent everybody else is. But we need to mature as a society in these debates and try and actually talk about what is it that we want and how far we want to go and what are the issues. And I think that, being a journalist myself, and I feel that it is important that these matters be put on the table and that it be discussed very extensively. As for Susan, this session is supposed to be about the ANC under Zuma. So I wonder if you could just give us a sense of the policy conference coming up now and what the ANC under Zuma is going to be giving us, or is taking, which direction it's taking us at the end of this month. Thank you.
Actually, we thought we would deal with that in the second session, the ANC under Zuma. So, question there?
So I want to come back to the notion that you referred to right at the beginning, which is the notion of the second transition. I'd like to ask the panelists to elaborate on exactly what is outlined in the policy document to give us a better sense of what is meant by, or what is supposedly meant by the second transition.
Ben?
The discussion this afternoon is spoken as though we have one ANC. The ANC is going to propose this, and this is their stance. But actually we know that ANC is riven by factional conflict. So what would be nice to talk about would be what those factions are and what they represent. Superficially they're about people aiming to get into power. There's not much discussion about policy, but I would suggest this is a superficial analysis because probably those factional conflicts represent much deeper divisions in society. And I don't actually see political analysts saying very much about the connection between these underlying risks, in particular emergent class interests. I mean, Anthony referred obliquely to that in respect of mining. BE interests are, in some ways, favorably disposed to state mining or forms of nationalization. But, you could interpret the ANC Youth League as representing an aspirant capitalist class who want to get rich quick, and other interests in the ANC representing more established black capitalist interests. And you could see the COSATU and SACP as incipiently representing a very different kind of interest in society. But very often political analysts don't actually talk about society on the one hand and what this means for politics on the other.
We'll bring in Susan at this point.
Thank you for those questions. Yeah, I think your question intricately relates to exactly the second transition, and I'll reserve most of my comments for the second half about the ANC under Jacob Zuma. And this has been, it's not the start of the ANC in business. The ANC has been in business ever since it took power, and in business in many different variations on that term. But class capital formation, the black middle class has rapidly escalated generally in society. The political class is the most rapidly grown political economic entity in South Africa, and there are so many conflicting interests in this, and that also makes it the policy. One cannot just read the policy documents on one level. One has to look at where does it come from. Very interestingly too, about the conundrum that the ANC finds itself in at this stage, is that I have heard many questions about the ownership of these documents. Some analysts, consultants tell me that we recognize these portions of these documents from consultancy documents that we wrote some time ago. Others say, Gujante suggested earlier this week, and other people too, that SACP influences come through a bit strongly on here. I know about one lawyer's firm, but there are also consultants in there. They have written parts of some documents. And this tells us a massive amount about the ANC at this stage and how conflicted it is. And it is excellent at identifying what are the problems in contemporary South Africa, what are the issues that need to be addressed, even what has gone wrong. But then, and I think Anthony made a brief comment to that too, it comes with partial solutions, and as my term, it comes with partial solutions. It does not match the scope of the problems that are there. And one finds these conflicts running through many of the documents. And one does not know is that the class interests that speak, that are the reason for these discrepancies. Is it just incoherent policy planning? Is it policy cul-de-sac that so many policies have been tried? And so many other problems about policy and policy implementation reside in the state and the nature of the state and the nature, and what the state has not started to be, but it has further turned out to be under Jacob Zuma. That there are just dead ends as to how much can the state further be turned around and not cut out something which the ANC has really come to depend on, and that is its own patronage, its own nurturing of its own class of political leaders in the ANC and in the state, and using state patronage positions to keep that political class happy and to manufacture the next policy majority as one goes along in a term of government. Yes, I think that is enough for me for this time now.
I think in regard to your question about the nature of the second transition, part of the difficulty is that the document, which in many ways is quite an impressive document in that it is, as Suzanne said, brutally frank about areas of failure. The concept of the second transition is not defined. The goal of the second transition is freedom from socio-economic bondage. The road to that, attaining that goal is not specifically spelled out. There are references to constraints, to the current structures, etc., which suggest that there are aspects of the Constitution which are seen as possible impediments that are blocking more effective transformation, but it is not spelled out in any great detail. The goals, the objectives, the primary objective and the secondary objectives are clearly spelled out. What is dealt with very vaguely is the road, the path along which, and the sector documents are not particularly effective either. I mean, I thought the document on education was particularly weak. That really doesn't talk about the problems in the classroom, the problems of the lack of a teaching culture, the lack of, say, of a reading culture, the politicization of satire. None of these things are addressed. It talks about technical details about more effective textbook delivery. We ought to set up a state publishing house to produce textbooks more timely. These are these are not really the answers to the bigger questions, but one could possibly suggest this, perhaps in a sense the policymakers are in a cul-de-sac. They don't really know where to go. They don't know how to get it right. I mean, the question is, why do we need any additional instruments other than the instruments of the first transition to reach those goals of the second transition? So it doesn't make for a very rich discussion if you don't have the detail. And that's part of the problem. We're dealing with rather vague generalities here.
Can I add something more? Just a little addition here on the second transition. Something that really occurred to me in reading through the second transition documents and some of the sector documents is what I term in my policy analysis as long-termism. In formalizing this idea of the second transition, it happens to fit very closely with the National Democratic Revolution and the two-phase revolution. That it's as if the ANC, by using that, tries to build an extra time for it to achieve their better delivery, their real socio-economic transformation, which I then differentiate from the political transformation that has happened. And this is really, one finds this long-termism across these documents, that they formalize that we need more time, you don't expect too much now, but we even see it in concrete proposals. So much is made of the infrastructural development plan and how that is a big new vision. These are small solutions in the overall scheme of things. It is long-term. It has been funded properly. The funding models are very much outstanding on that. And in the second transition, it took the notion 30, 50 years. In other words, just be patient. Delivery comes. It is not quite our fault that things have not quite happened. And recently, Ashilma Mbende used a very useful phrase when he talked about that's just the term expiry date, but expiring to the dilapidated use of struggle capital by the ANC. That they said, struggle, yes, of course, capitalism and apartheid had huge structural impact on society. But he was referring to the idea that the ANC, and we all know that's public debate, cannot forever keep on using the struggle and colonialism, as real as those impacts are, as the reason for not performing better and performing faster. And so I think the second transition is really much about playing for time, buying extra time, buying in a certain sense of word from the people to try to get them to keep up their confidence and trust in the ANC.
I just wanted to say a bit about the question of class analysis and class division. I think it's rather a complicated issue, but it has looked like the ANC has been moving away from a pattern of division based around regions and ethnic affiliations to some extent, to a pattern of factionalism organized in part around class. So historically you would expect a successful faction contending for leadership positions in the ANC to have support from one of the large the larger component parts of the ANC in Eastern Cape or in Natal. And when you look over the past decade at the factions that have been fairly coherent in internal ANC politics, still those two parts of the ANC, those two provincial structures have been very important in politics. But you've also seen the left broadly as a reasonably coherent actor, particularly before Polokwane. Although, of course, we mustn't forget that both COSATU and the SACP were divided seriously around the leadership issue before Polokwane. But we've also seen the emergence of business power, which is often expressed by the power of ANC leaders who are based in Gauteng. So it's difficult, for example, to look at the challenge from the what I think we're not supposed to call the Invader group of challengers, Joker, Siswali, and Mbalula, and so on, Umashile, were all essentially Gauteng-based, and who have the resources to spread their influence nationally, using instruments like the Youth League. So the Youth League, in a way, has been, under the lemma, a translation of the money of Gauteng into a national political structure that can be used to influence politics. So what you see there is a pattern of class conflict beginning to supplant, or at least to mix with, regional power bases. However, it's become rather complicated by a number of different issues. One of them is the fact that although the class structure within the ANC has differentiated and become more complex, with many more wealthy people at the top, it's still overwhelmingly organized among poor people in ordinary branches. And I think the only solution to that for the ANC is going to be to make the organization less democratic. I think that's the direction that the leadership is moving in, to ensure that ordinary members cannot exert too direct an influence over the decisions of the policy decisions of the ANC. But also what's been happening is that the left is increasingly in disarray, partly because the class structure issues are not straightforward. There are organizations like COSATU. COSATU is increasingly a middle-class organization. If you look at the numbers involved in COSATU unions, we're now just about reaching the point where the public sector unions are about the same number of paid-out members as the industrial and mining unions. And that's going to continue because we're seeing deindustrialization and growth in public sector employment. Public sector workers are middle class. They may be very badly paid middle class, but they are quite different in their political dynamics to what we might understand as organized workers. So the emergence of patterns of class organization is likely to be quite complicated. And we also see a resurgence, of course, of both regional and ethnic power. So we've seen the collapse of Eastern Cape political organisations, perhaps only temporarily so, the split of COPE, and we've seen a high degree of organisation in KZN, and an increase in low-level ethnic mobilisation as well, which perhaps is a trend that's going to continue. So I don't think we have a straightforward pattern of social modernisation in which class will replace region and other forms of identity.
Thanks, Anthony. Look, there are lots of very interesting and rich ideas there, but I think we just have to take a 5-minute pause. Some people might want to leave and go to other panels. Other people are trying to come in. So can we just stop for 5 minutes and reconvene 5 past 3?